I returned to the Claymore Ranch on an October afternoon when the cold wind had begun slipping through the brittle leaves. My Jeep pulled up in front of the weathered wooden porch, once my childhood heaven, now just a faded patch of memory. The wind chimes clinked softly above the porch, a sound that once meant peace, now only made my chest tighten. I hadn't been back in nearly 2 years, not because I didn't want to, but because I was told there was no one left to come home to. Just as I stepped onto the porch, the door swung open. "You finally decided to show your face." The voice was cold, rusty like corroded steel, aged but sharp. I froze. Standing before me was my grandmother, Esther, in a dark wool dress, hands on hips, eyes slicing through me like a verdict. "Granda, I thought they told me you had moved into a nursing home." "That's what they said?" she snapped. "And you believed it?" I swallowed hard. A gust slipped under my collar, sending a chill down my spine, but what rooted me to the porch was the disappointment carved into every line of her face. "You didn't even come say goodbye to your grandfather," she continued. "He called your name over and over on his deathbed. 'Where's my Morgan? My little engineer?' But you never answered." Felt like a slap across the face. My chest tightened. "That's not possible. I didn't know. How could he have called me? I never got any calls from him." She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly turned and walked back into the house. I hesitated, then followed like a guilty child. Inside, everything was nearly the same. The scent of pine wood, the faint trace of apple pie in the walls, and the little desk where Grandpa used to sit for hours reading. But now, everything carried a heavy silence. She turned around, holding an old notebook, its corners curled and frayed. "This was the one he carried the last few months," she said. "The last page is a list of the numbers he called. Look carefully." My hands trembled as I opened it. Grandpa's familiar handwriting stood out, neat, deliberate. I read the number he had called, and felt like someone squeezed my lungs. "This isn't my number," I whispered, barely believing it. "I've never changed it. It's been the same since I was 17. She paused, then sank into the armchair near the fireplace. Her eyes softened, but the weariness in them was unmistakable. "Your parents and Julia, they told us you'd cut off all contact, said you changed your number, blocked the whole family, that you didn't want anything to do with us anymore." "That's not true," I shot up, heart pounding. "I came back last summer. I stopped by here, but Julia said you had moved. She told me no one lived here anymore." Grandma's face paled. Her lips moved, but no words came. A moment later, she exhaled slowly, like someone hit her with a truth. Too late. "We were here," she whispered. "This whole time, we never left." I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. My mind was spinning. They had lied. They'd created an entire story to cut me off from my grandparents. But why? I remembered the unanswered texts, the emails that vanished into silence, the calls home that rang busy. It all made sense now. "They died, thinking I didn't come to say goodbye," I said, my voice cracked. "He left this world believing I didn't care." I dropped to my knees beside her, shaking. She didn't push me away. Her hand rested gently on my shoulder. She said nothing. But I knew she understood everything. I sat on the old wooden chair by the window, still clutching Grandpa's notebook. Grandma Esther quietly poured 2 cups of Earl Grey tea and placed one in front of me. That familiar scent caught in my chest. There was a time when I sat here every morning reading next to Grandpa while Grandma knitted in this very chair. Now it was all just memory. And only now did I understand why everything had suddenly vanished from my life. "Morgan," she spoke after a long pause, "we need to talk this through." I nodded, my chest hollow. "When your grandfather fell ill, around last February, he started calling you every day. No one ever picked up. After a few weeks, your parents and Julia told us you had changed your number, didn't want to be bothered anymore." My eyes widened, disbelief flooding in. That's when they told us to move into a nursing facility, said you'd never come back. I blurted out, but that's impossible. I searched everywhere, called every facility. I never found either of your names in any registry. She sighed gently. Your grandfather had doubts too, but he was too weak to look into it, and I believed them. I thought maybe you were mad at the family and didn't want to come back. I swallowed down the rising anger, then stood and walked to the bookshelf in the corner. I dug into my backpack, pulled out a cream-colored envelope, and placed it on the table. This is the letter I wrote to you both. For Grandpa's birthday, I said, voice dry. I mailed it to the house here in Claymore. The post office returned it, marked, address not found. She furrowed her brows, unfolding the envelope. I had handwritten, Happy 82nd birthday, Grandpa, love, M, in deep blue ink. The postmark was April 8th, just 3 days before he died. What did Julia tell you? I asked, my throat tightening. She said, you were studying abroad in Europe, hard to reach, Grandma replied, lips tight. Then, when the funeral was held, she claimed you were busy with some technology exhibition and couldn't come. But I've never heard anything about you studying in Europe. I let out a dry laugh. I go to Stanford on a full scholarship. I've never left the US since I started. The truth cracked open the room like a slow-burning fuse. She slowly sat down, her trembling hands clasped tightly together. Though for 2 years, I was trapped in a lie they built, she whispered. I nodded. Then a thought struck me, cold. They purposely isolated me from you and Grandpa, tried to erase me from his life. Her eyes flickered with something close to fear. But why? Because I was the one he trusted. I was the one he called his little engineer. Julia, she only played the part of the good granddaughter to win him over. Grandma looked up at me, her mouth slightly open. Yes, Julia did visit often, brought baked goods, flowers, but never stayed long, always rushed, and the moment your grandfather passed, she was the first to demand a copy of the will. My stomach twisted. Did you let her see it? She shook her head, her gaze firm. No, I told her the original was kept safe and would only be read with all family present. A heavy breath passed between us. Then she stood, walked to a small wall cabinet, and opened a hidden drawer. She pulled out a thick leather-bound folder and set it on the table. This will, your grandfather updated it 3 months before he died. No one else knew. I stared at the folder, heart pounding. The scent of old paper drifted through the air, along with a feeling that I was about to unlock a stolen piece of my past. I think it's time to call the family, she said, and the attorney. I gripped the chair tightly, the cold inside me turning into a quiet fire. My whole life, I'd let them dictate things, steer the narrative, suffer in silence because I thought that was what family meant. But now I knew my silence had only enabled them. I looked at her, and she looked back. In her eyes, I saw regret, fury, and something else. Resolve. Call them Grandma, I said softly. I'm done running. A quiet flicker of light sparked in Esther's eyes, like she had been waiting for that sentence for a very long time. I remember that day clearly. Saturday, April 22nd. I wore a simple black dress and held a bouquet of white daisies, Grandpa's favorite. I arrived at St. Andrew's Church on the corner of Grant Street at 11:30, just as Mom had texted. Funeral starts at 12 p.m. Don't be late. When I stepped inside, the place was completely empty. No music, no rows of chairs draped in black, not a single soul. Just pale yellow light pouring through stained glass windows, falling onto the cold stone floor. I thought I had the wrong place. I called Mom. No answer. Called Dad. His phone was off. Julia? The call rang for a while, then dropped. I sank onto the last pew, my heart clenched like a fist. About 10 minutes later, the church caretaker, Mr. Lincoln, walked in. He spotted me and froze. You're Mr. Harold's family? I stood up, holding back tears. Yes, I'm Morgan, his granddaughter. I'm here for the funeral. Mr. Lincoln's face showed confusion. But The service was at 8 a.m. The family asked us to keep it private. Invite only. They specifically said not to notify anyone outside the list. I stood there, stunned. They said, "You wouldn't be attending," he added softly. "That you'd moved away, lost contact. I... I'm sorry if there was any misunderstanding." It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. Everything was crystal clear. I left the church like a sleepwalker, the daisies still in my hand, never placed anywhere. I had missed my final moment with Grandpa, not because I didn't care, but because I was deliberately cut out by my own family. That afternoon, when I told Grandma Esther everything, she just sat there silently, her eyes fixed on the small fire crackling in the hearth. 8 a.m., she murmured. "I thought you really weren't coming. They even said you sent a message saying you were too busy to attend." I laughed dryly, soundless, only the salt in my mouth and the feeling of swallowing stone. I was there, right church, right day, just the wrong time. She nodded slightly, one hand gripping the shawl over her shoulders. "After that, Julia came here, said you were too busy with your new life and didn't need to bother with old family matters. She told me I should move into Oak Pine Senior Facility so I could be properly taken care of." "And you agreed?" "No," she replied, her eyes sharpening. "But I pretended to. I wanted to see what they were after, and, truth be told, I had started to suspect something. I looked at her like a soldier seeing her fellow fighter emerge from the shadows. I secretly called Harold's old attorney," she continued, "asked if anyone had requested changes to the will. He paused, then said the only update came from Harold himself, handwritten, 3 months before his passing. No one else was present. "So that means," I said, a spark flickering in my chest, "they don't know the real contents of the will?" She nodded. "And they don't know your grandfather recorded the whole session. I have a copy." The room fell silent. I had never known Grandpa to be so meticulous. But now it all made sense. He knew his time was limited, and he knew exactly what could happen once he was gone. "They created an entire private funeral," I said, eyes closing, "to bury him, and to bury my name with him." "But Harold didn't let that happen," she said, quietly but firmly. "He left proof. So if the worst came to pass, you'd at least know he never turned his back on you." I turned to look at her. We said nothing more. We just sat there, two women once cast aside by their own blood, glistening to the pop of firewood in the hearth and the night wind howling beyond the window glass. Grandma Esther didn't waste any time. Early the next morning, after a nearly sleepless night, she sat at the old wall-mount phone in the kitchen, the one I thought had been long forgotten, and dialed. I sat across from her, silently sipping lukewarm coffee from a mug that read, "World's Best Grandpa." My chest churned so much I couldn't tell if the bitterness came from the coffee or the truth that had exploded just the day before. "Carol, it's Mom," she said, her voice calm, like inviting her daughter over for dinner. "Tell Jacob and Julia to be here at the ranch house by 3 p.m. Don't be late. There's something that needs to be addressed." I couldn't hear the other end of the call. She simply hung up neatly, then turned to me. "Your grandfather's attorney Bernard Miller is on his way. He said, it's time." By 2:30, the air inside the house had completely changed. I kept to myself in the kitchen, the same corner where, at age 10, I used to clip science articles for Grandpa and tape them to the wall. Some of those clippings were still there, faded but intact. On the table sat the leather-bound folder and a bronze-colored USB drive that Grandma said contained the recorded footage of my grandfather signing his will. A fountain pen lay beside it, its nib pointed toward the door, a small detail that somehow chilled me. "Morgan," Grandma placed a steady hand on my shoulder, "when I call you out, just speak the truth, no need to argue." I nodded. My chest ached, but my back was straight. At 5 minutes to 3, the sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed outside. I quietly peeked through the crack in the door. Dad's SUV pulled up close to the porch steps like he still owned the place. Mom, Carol, stepped out first with a designer handbag and guarded eyes. Julia came last, oversized sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. They didn't knock. They walked right in as if nothing had ever happened. Grandma Esther stood in the living room, one hand resting on the back of a chair. Attorney Miller, an elderly man with silver hair, nodded to each of them in turn. He was opening his briefcase when Julia spoke up first. "What's the point of calling the whole family here? I thought the funeral was over." Grandma didn't answer. She simply looked toward the kitchen and gave me a single nod. I stepped into the room. All three froze. Julia lowered her sunglasses, eyes wide. "Morgan?" Mom stammered. Why, why are you here?" Dad just tightened his grip on his briefcase strap, as if trying to hide something. "I never left this family," I said, my voice low. "But it seems like everyone else went out of their way to cut me out." Grandma cut in, not allowing anyone time to respond. "Today, I've called everyone here to hear the reading of Harold Russell's final will, handwritten, signed, and recorded by him 3 months before his passing." Attorney Miller plugged the USB into the flat-screen TV on the wall. Grandpa appeared on screen. Thinner than I remembered, but his eyes still sharp and full of light. He looked straight into the camera. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. I hope this brings clarity to what I've left behind and ensures no one can distort what I believe in." The room went dead silent. Julia gripped the armrest. Dad sat upright but couldn't take his eyes off the screen. Mom covered her mouth, but the trembling in her eyes betrayed her. "I leave my financial assets to be divided equally between my two granddaughters, Morgan Russell and Julia Russell," Grandpa continued. "But the Russell Agritech Research Center, including all ownership, technology, patents, and a 10-year development fund, I leave entirely to Morgan." A soft clink broke the silence, the sound of Mom's glass dropping to the floor. "Because Morgan, since the age of 7, recorded the growth cycle of wheat in a notebook. Because Morgan rebuilt my water filtration model using nothing but straws and old syringes. And because Morgan never used affection as currency to earn inheritance." I felt my heart tighten, but he wasn't finished. "Lastly, I appoint the person I trusted most, my wife, Esther, as the sole custodian of the original document, with full authority to nullify any external legal challenges." The screen went dark. Attorney Miller closed his briefcase. No one spoke. Until Julia shot up from her seat. "No," she yelled. "He promised. He said if I took care of him, if I did things right, then everything would be mine. Everything." I looked her straight in the eye. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. Attorney Miller opened the folder in his hands. His voice was steady and clear, echoing through the room, still taut as a wire after my grandfather's recorded video had finished. "According to the legal wishes of Mr. Harold Russell, signed and notarized on January 18th of last year, the estate is to be distributed as follows." I gripped the edge of my chair. Beside me, Grandma Esther placed her hand on her knee, composed, but her eyes locked on the attorney. "First, full ownership of the Claymore farm property and lifetime care expenses, including insurance, health care, and living costs, are to be transferred to the widow, Mrs. Esther Russell." No one reacted. She simply gave a slight nod as if she'd already known. "Second, full ownership of the Russell Agritech Research Center, located at 19 Bloomfield Ridge, including land, buildings, equipment, ongoing projects, intellectual property, technical documents, patents, copyrights, and a development fund valued at $6 million, is hereby left entirely to Morgan Russell." The room burst like a balloon pierced by a needle. I froze. $6 million? Grandpa used to call the lab a little gift for my science-loving granddaughter, but this? Julia nearly jumped from her seat. "What?" she shrieked, her lips trembling. "That center? He said it was just under Morgan's name, temporarily. Temporarily, I was supposed to take over." Attorney Miller calmly flipped to the next page. "Third, the remainder of the estate, including personal investments, stocks, savings accounts, and income from 3 farms in Montana, estimated to total around $4 million, will be split equally between the 2 granddaughters, Morgan Russell and Julia Russell." No! Julia slammed her hand on the table. This is insane. Why should I have to split it with her? She never took care of Grandpa. She disappeared for a whole year. I was here. I bought his groceries. I took him to his doctor's appointments. You used his credit card, I said quietly, each word slicing through the tension. And the medical visits were arranged by the nurse from his care service. You just sat in the car. Julia spun toward me, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. You're trying to take everything, huh? She hissed. You ungrateful brat. Gone for years and now you show up demanding an inheritance? Not happening. My father, Jacob, cleared his throat. Calm down, Julia. We can still negotiate. But Attorney Miller cut in. I'm sorry, Mr. Russell. This will is legally verified. Every amendment is backed by formal documentation. Any disputes must go through court. My mother, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke up. We're not contesting the equal split, but it's unreasonable for Morgan to receive the entire research center. She's never managed anything. What is she going to do with a $6 million lab? I turned to face her. No longer scared, no longer unsure. I'll do exactly what Grandpa wanted. Continue developing drought-resistant soil technology and cultivating arid region crops for the western states. And by the end of this year, I'll apply for the joint fund with Purdue University. He already prepared the paperwork before he passed. Silence. I saw Julia struggling to swallow her pride. Her eyes were red, but no tears came. Maybe because she knew this time there was no escape. Attorney Miller closed the file. A full copy will be sent to each party within 2 weeks. If there are no legal challenges, asset transfers will be completed by next quarter. I heard my father exhale. My mother stood up, her face stone cold. So, the old man made his choice, she said, turning away. Nothing left to discuss. Julia stormed toward the door, heels stomping with each step. Just before she left, she turned around, her eyes burning with rage. You think you've won? You're just a bookworm Grandpa babied. Just wait. I'll make sure you pay for stealing what was rightfully mine. I didn't reply. I just looked at her in silence, letting her bitterness fill the room that no longer belonged to them. And in my chest, a strange mix of pain and relief began to flicker. I hadn't been erased from this family, at least Grandpa had made sure of that. Attorney Miller remained seated. As the tension in the room slowly faded, he reached into the leather folder and pulled out an envelope sealed with deep red wax, its edges slightly yellowed with age. On the front, a familiar slanted script stood out. For Morgan. Read when you're ready. I stared at the words. My throat went dry. I reached out, but Mr. Miller held it back for a beat. The letter is to be read aloud, he said, gently but firmly. Mr. Harold wanted nothing left to be twisted. I nodded and let go, sitting upright. Julia stood near the door but didn't leave. My parents were silent, their eyes tense, as if waiting for a blow. Esther had closed her eyes, hands clasped together in quiet prayer. Mr. Miller slowly broke the seal and drew out a handwritten page. My grandfather's handwriting was as steady and elegant as always, as if every line carried unspoken weight. He began to read, My dearest Morgan, if you're hearing this, then I'm no longer with you. But I hope these words say what I never said enough. You were the first light I saw after a long life stuck in old patterns. You were unlike anyone, and that was the most beautiful thing. When you were just 8, you amazed me by mixing backyard water, soil, and wildflowers, then declaring you were building a mini ecosystem. People laughed. But I saw a budding scientist. His voice paused. I felt a shiver down my spine. That memory, word for word, was the first time I ever felt seen. They called you odd, a loner, a girl who preferred science books over dolls, who asked questions adults didn't know how to answer. It made them uncomfortable. They pushed you aside. Worse, they told me not to encourage your weirdness. But I never saw you as weird. I saw you as brave, because you dared to be different. They didn't know when the tears started. I wiped them away with the back of my hand, trying not to shake. I saw you quietly hiding your science books under the bed because your mom said your room looked like a dirty lab. I saw you tuck away your article from the teen inventors section of the local paper because Julia called it useless. I know you've wondered if you were a burden to your family, and it broke my heart that I didn't always protect you enough. But Russell Agritech? That was my way of making it right. I built it for you. No asking permission. No warning. Because I believed you needed a place to shine without asking anyone for approval. I could no longer hold still, my hands clenched tightly in my lap to keep from sobbing. Morgan, I'm proud of you, more than of anything I've ever achieved. You are not the one who was abandoned. You are the one they never deserved. They chose ease, you chose truth, and I chose you. Mr. Miller gently folded the letter and placed it on the table. No one spoke, not a single word. Julia gripped her purse strap like she might snap it in two. My mother turned away, covering her face with one hand. My father lowered his head, lost in some calculation he now knew was too late. Esther looked at me, her eyes full of tears but steady. You've always deserved better, Morgan. You just needed someone to say it out loud. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But inside me, the fractures that had quietly split me for years were beginning to heal. Not because I got an inheritance, but because I now knew, in the heart of the only person who ever truly saw me, I had never been invisible. I was Morgan, his little scientist. Is everyone done? Julia's voice cut through the air, sharp after the letter was read. Now it's my turn to speak. She stood up, stepping to the center of the room like she was starring in a theater play. I was the one promised everything, Julia declared, staring straight at Grandma Esther before turning to Morgan. Not her, me. When I was 15, Grandpa said, if you take care of me, if you know how to protect this family legacy, then it will all be yours. And now he turns around, gives everything to this girl? I didn't react. I just looked at her. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid or like I had to justify myself. You didn't take care of him, I replied quietly. You performed. It was all an act. Julia gave a bitter laugh. And what about you? You vanished for 3 years, didn't even bother to call, and now you show up demanding a place in the will? Who do you think you are? I stood up, no longer willing to stay silent. Do you remember that summer when you were 14 and Grandpa caught me tinkering with the drip irrigation system? And you turned around and submitted my presentation to the science fair as your own? He didn't say much, just, I hope you two learn to value each other. I paused, holding her gaze. Or 10th grade, when you were praised for community service, for organizing a STEM program for underprivileged kids. Mom called it Julia's initiative, but the idea was mine. And the one who wrote the lesson plans, printed the materials, taught for 6 straight weeks was me. I turned to Mom. You knew, but you said your sister needs a strong resume for Stanford. And to me, you said, you're smart enough, you don't need accolades. Mom frowned. Morgan, that was a long time ago. No, Mom, I cut in. It's never been a long time ago, because it never ended. When we were kids, you cut my birthday budget to throw Julia's Sweet 16 bash. When I started college, Dad said the family was tight on money. But the next month, Julia went on a 2-week Europe trip. Everything I achieved was hidden or handed to her. And when I spoke up, you called me selfish. Julia stepped forward, voice rising. You're trying to turn everyone against me? You did that to yourself, I said. You turned family into a competition, and you used our parents as biased referees. The room fell silent. Grandma Esther looked at me, then at the others. Everything Morgan said is true. Dad exhaled loudly. Esther, we're not here to rehash the past. We're here to talk about the estate, about integrity. She cut in, her voice low and solid as stone. And family. She stood, bracing herself against the back of the chair, eyes scanning each of us. I stayed silent before. I believed elders shouldn't interfere in how their children raise the next generation. But now I see that silence was a mistake. I let Harold be exploited. I let Morgan be cast aside, and I sat by and watched it all. Mom stood, clearly agitated. Mom, that's not fair. We're your children too. I can't believe you would take her side. I'm not choosing sides, she said, voice trembling but clear. You already made the choice. You chose to lie. You chose to discard a granddaughter who didn't fit your mold. And now you want to claim the reward she deserves? No one said a word. I won't allow that, she continued. This house no longer has room for deceit, for exploiting family bonds for gain. I clenched my fists. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but because for the first time, someone was standing beside me, openly, firmly. You can go back to your lawyers. You can sue. But I will testify. Every word Morgan said, I will stand behind it, with my name, my memory, and everything Harold entrusted to her. Julia looked around, panicked. You can't do this to me. I'm blood. Morgan is blood too, she replied, eyes fierce like slow-burning fire. But unlike you, she never used blood ties to bargain for loyalty. Then she pointed to the door. Get out of my house right now. No one moved. She repeated, not yelling, but with words like nails hammered into wood. Leave. Now. Dad bit his lip, grabbed his briefcase. Mom turned away silently. Julia hesitated, then spun on her heel. The door shut behind them, not loudly, but inside me it thundered like a final verdict had been delivered. Firm, irreversible. 6 years later, I stood on the rooftop of the Claymore Center for Biotechnology, a 5-story building made of transparent glass, rising from the very land where my grandfather once grew corn. The Central Texas wind swept past the solar panels on the roof, carrying the scent of soil, sunlight, and a sense of freedom I'd never known during the first 2 decades of my life. The center that Harold laid the foundation for and entrusted to me has now become one of the nation's leading independent hubs for regenerative farming technology and AI-integrated drip irrigation systems. We work with more than 300 farms across the American Southwest, from Arizona to New Mexico, helping them restore depleted soil, reduce water waste, and increase yield without harming the environment. I'm not walking this path alone. Bryn, my best friend since college, is now the director of engineering at the center, and Leo, a quiet but brilliant coder, manages all our sensor systems. Every week we have lunch together outside. Sometimes we char the corn or forget to turn the stove down in our test kitchen, but no one minds, because this place lets all of us simply be who we are. We do science, but we also build trust. Back in February, I received the National Award for Innovation in Agricultural Sustainability. I stood on stage at the conference in San Diego, dressed in a navy blue suit with my speech broadcast live on 3 industry channels. When I mentioned Harold Russell's name at the end, the entire auditorium rose in applause. I didn't cry, but I felt him there with every heartbeat. Last week, while reorganizing the 3rd floor archive, formerly his attic office, I came across a wooden box with a latch. Inside were items not listed in the transfer inventory, an old notebook, the first blueprint of a solar-powered water filtration system, and a photo, its edges blurred with time. I knew it instantly. Me, age 9, kneeling in the backyard, holding a magnifying glass to a cicada on a blade of grass. My grandfather stood behind me, pointing at something off frame, his face lit with laughter. We were both wearing work clothes. I still remember that t-shirt had belonged to him, and it hung to my knees. On the back, written in blue ink, were the words, "My little scientist will change the world someday." I sat down on the cold wooden floor, cradled the photo like something once lost but never truly gone. My old family? They've been silent for 6 years. No calls, no emails. Except for one time when Julia tried to friend me from a fake LinkedIn account. I simply hit block. Dad, according to an old acquaintance, retired from his real estate firm after losing a financial lawsuit. Mom moved in with her sister in Vermont. Julia is still trying to launch a copycat agritech startup. But in the industry, no one sees her as a real innovator. I don't feel triumphant. I don't feel bitter either, because I've come far enough to know that the only parts of the past worth keeping are the people who never tried to shrink you to fit their version of love. Tonight, I'll be speaking to first year students at Texas State University's School of Engineering. The topic: Science Like Humanity, bold and unapologetic. I'll bring that photo with me, framed in simple wood, set beside the podium, not to show off, but to remember that long before the world saw my worth, someone already believed I would make it. What my grandfather gave me wasn't just money or land. He left me something far rarer. Unconditional belief, a beginning that didn't ask for permission, a space where I could be fully myself, brilliant, eccentric, and never small for someone else's comfort. Morgan's story reminds us that silence in the face of injustice isn't humility. It can be complicity in manipulation. When someone dares to rise and refuses to let the past define their worth, they don't just reclaim their voice, they pave the way for true recognition. Morgan's success didn't come from revenge, but from staying true to herself, even when misunderstood, rejected, or isolated, because sometimes the greatest thing we can do is live right and live bigger than every small expectation. What do you think about Morgan's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and powerful stories about family and life.